In this video, we will show you how to replace the rear brakes on this Chevy Malibu. These will be located behind your rear wheels. Let's get into it. Okay friend, let's get started on our job. The first thing you need to do is safely raise and support the rear of the vehicle so the wheels are off the ground. Once you've done that, we're going to continue on with a 22mm to remove each of our 5 lug nuts and then remove the wheel from the area. Use an 11mm to turn this counterclockwise and open it up. Before you do so, we need to mention hand and eye protection and have a collection bucket under this area. We want to wait until we see a steady trickle of fluid coming out and then we'll close this bleeder screw. I got my bucket under there, my 11mm. Once you see a trickle of fluid coming out of here, we can continue on. Let's move along the back side of the caliper here. You'll find that you have 2 13mm caliper slider bolts. As you remove your mounting hardware, give it a quick inspection. If it needs to be replaced, now's the time to do it. Should never put grease on your mounting hardware. Let's give this a wiggle. At this point, we should be able to pull this out of here and we'll give the piston a quick inspection. There we are. Now that we have that separated, it's extremely important to make sure you pay attention in this area. This rubber boot is considered a dust boot. If you did see fluid coming out of here, that means that the internal seal around the piston internally is damaged. If that's the case, you have to replace the caliper. Let's move along to removing the brake pads from this area. Now we can remove the caliper bracket. You'll find that this is held in place with 2 18mm headed mounting bolts. As for this upper bolt, you may find that it really doesn't want to come out past this other suspension mounting bolt. That's okay. We'll loosen this up, completely remove this one, and then we should be able to move things around as needed to be able to fully remove that bolt. Inspect your mounting hardware. Once again, you should not have any grease like this on your mounting hardware. To remove the brake rotor, you may find that it's held in place with a mounting screw. This will commonly make its way through the brake rotor and hold it to the wheel bearing located behind it. Ours is already missing, so I don't have anything to show you, but commonly you would just use a Torx bit socket or a Phillips head and unscrew that counterclockwise. Once that's out of the way, continue on to removing the brake rotor. Clean the area. Use a wire brush, whatever you might happen to have. We want to have a smooth surface here. Once your mating surface is clean and smooth, use some anti-seize directly on the mating surface. Before we continue on with the rotor, let's pay attention in this area where the caliper would be mounted against. Ensure that you don't see any miscellaneous debris like what you can see along this area. We'll use a wire brush or scraper. Aside from that, we want to ensure that there's nothing inside of either of these ports and inspect the part of the bolt that you can see as you push this through. Ensure that there's no grease or lubricant in this area. Now we can install our brake rotor. If you have a coated rotor, you do not need to clean the braking surface. If you have an uncoated rotor, you need to make sure you clean both sides of your braking surface. Let's continue on with putting it in place, ensuring that we align it with the mounting bolt hole. Once you have that rested against the wheel bearing, the next thing you would want to do would be to install this bolt and make sure it's nice and snug. Since ours did not have a bolt, I'll use a spacer and a lug nut to hold this in place. Now let's pay attention to our caliper bracket. It's important to make sure that you clean and lubricate it. On the caliper bracket itself, you're going to find that you have two tins, one on each side. Go ahead and remove those tins and give them a quick inspection. We're going to clean here, but let's pause and make our way to each of the two caliper slider pins. For each of those pins, you'll find that they also have boots around them. Take hold of the pin, give it a wiggle, and slide it out of place. Now while you pull that out, we want to make sure that you clean it and inspect it. We have the shaft area here, which will slide in and out of the bracket itself, but up where my fingers are, there's a small groove that you need to clean as well. That's where the slider boot will ride, and if it's full of debris, you're going to have an issue. When removing these slider pins, make sure you put them back in the original ports. If when inspecting this you found that this area was rotted and you felt as though it would restrict the movement, it's a good idea to go ahead and replace the slider pins. When you do them as a pair. With the pin out of the way, the next thing we want to pay attention to is our boot. You'll find that that protective boot is held onto the bracket itself. You want to carefully try to pull that out of place. If you need a small pocket screwdriver or a pick, be extremely careful not to damage the boot. We'll just roll that right out of there. At this point, you want to ensure that it is still soft and pliable and not torn, worn, or damaged in any way. After that, it's also a great idea to make sure you clean out any of the original lubricant in this area just in case it has any foreign contaminants or debris. You can use a rag, just twist it up and slide it right on through the center. Just rub that on there. Do the exact same thing to the other side of the caliper bracket. Go ahead and take hold of that bracket, put it over a collection receptacle. It's time to get to cleaning the rest of the bracket itself. Now while we're cleaning the bracket, we're going to be cleaning along the areas where those two tins were located and inside of each one of the caliper slider ports. We can use a wire brush for this. Just give this area a quick inspection. Make sure it is a clean, smooth surface. If you have any buildup, you're going to have a braking issue. Do the same to the other side of the bracket. Now it's time for the caliper slider ports. Be extremely careful when using parts cleaner inside of these ports. As you spray in, it may potentially come back out towards you. We'll use some parts cleaner and a small bore brush. Let's give it a quick rinse. One last inspection inside of the port, And lastly, on this side, let's also focus along the outside of the port where that slider boot will go. Make sure you don't see any miscellaneous debris or raised areas. If you need to use your wire brush, continue on doing so. After that, do the exact same thing on the other side of the caliper bracket. With the caliper bracket cleaned up, we'll continue on with re-lubricating and reinstalling. Take some caliper lubricant and lubricate along each one of your caliper slider ports. You don't need to go ahead and force your way all the way inside because we will lubricate each one of the pins, but you do want to get the very tip and along the outer edges. Now it's time for our slider boots. Go ahead and take those and slide them into the proper position. Make sure it's completely seated all the way around. Now it's time to lubricate those slider pins. Once they're lubricated, make sure you put them back in the original position. While lubricating, we'll make our way up into that groove closest to my fingers here. Press it in, give it a wiggle, and make sure it is sealed so no moisture or debris makes its way inside. Do the exact same thing to the other slider pin. Let's lightly lubricate the area before we reinstall tins. When doing so, you don't want to have so much lubricant that it squeezes out and potentially gets on your braking friction material. If it looks like there's too much, just go ahead and wipe it down. Let's get these in place. Pay attention in the center, that is where the locking tabs will be. We'll press this into place and then reach along the center and make sure it's completely locked in. Do the exact same thing on the other side of the bracket. Now let's make our way back over to the vehicle. We're going to have to push back our caliper piston here. To do that, you'll find that you can't use a typical caliper piston compression tool and just squeeze this in. You have to actually make your way into this groove here and this groove right there, carefully twist and push at the same time, gently driving this into the fully inward position. You could use a specialty tool, or you could just use some long nose pliers. Whatever's best for you. Let's get this in here. We're going to twist and push. Continue doing this until the piston's pushed all the way inside of the caliper. Now it's time for the caliper bracket. Make sure you clean those mounting bolt threads, and if you're going to use thread locker, go ahead and use some blue. Once you've started these in by hand, snug them up, torque those to 74 foot-pounds. After you've torqued them to 74, you need to continue an additional 60 degrees. Let's get this lower one. Now that we have that bolt torqued, do the same exact thing to the upper mounting bolt. You may find you have a hard time getting your socket into this area. If so, continue on with a wrench and make sure it's nice and tight. Now it's time for our brake pads. When you go to install the brake pads, have a look along the back side. For the inboard pad, you're going to find that you have two wear indicators. On the outboard pad, looking at the outboard side, you will not have any wear indicators. Continue on by putting these in place. We'll slide them into the bracket. There we are. Double check to make sure it can move around and it's not stuck in there. If you have to use a hammer, something's not right. Let's get the outboard pad in there. Add some high temperature lubricant along the metal aspect of your caliper piston and along the backside of each of these two caliper ears. This will help with vibration dampening and noise reduction overall. Take this and slide it into place and start in each of your two 13mm headed caliper slider bolts. Start them in, snug them up, and then torque those to 20 foot-pounds. After that, continue torquing them an additional 60 degrees. Now we can get this out of here. Get the wheel in place. Start on all 5 of your 22mm lug nuts, bottom them out, get the wheel safely back down on the ground, and torque each of these lug nuts to 110 foot-pounds. With the wheel safely on the ground, torque these in a crisscross manner. Torqued. Okay friends, we've got our vehicle back together. Go ahead and pump up the brake pedal till it's nice and firm. After that, take your vehicle for a road test. Thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.